Well, hello everyone again, and my name is Kelli Ling, and I teach communication studies in Illinois, along with working on my doctorate. And today I'd like to share with you my qualitative conference paper on the construct of silence in response to adversity. A little different, I know. So as you can see, it's an expository essay on the role of silence in surviving adversity, stories from Japanese American internment survivors and their families. Okay, all right, so you may have heard this saying, silence speaks volumes, right? That may be somewhat familiar. Well, this is an important phrase for understanding the arguments that I make in the following. Perhaps too often we tend to think of verbal communications, vocal protest, outspokenness as the best way to respond to injustice and persecution. But my paper challenges that thinking in particular contexts. The situational context I'm referring to today is World War II and the internment of thousands of Japanese Americans on the basis of their ethnicity. So in my paper, I discuss the narratives of three Asian American authors, George Takei, often mispronounced as Takai, I guess, but it's Takei, Kimi Cunningham Grant, and Mako Nakagawa, along with the writings of two additional authors, Higuchi and Kame, all of whom experienced the horrors of internment, of forced internment, following the 41 Pearl Harbor attack. And I did bring the books as a visual, as a prop. I wasn't sure about, my concern was copyright, right? Showing it without having the author's permission. So I just brought them to show you that they have some really wonderful covers. I don't know if you can see that very well, but they're very powerful covers. Okay, so this forced internment in prison-style camps in the interior of the US came about after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japan in 1941. And it was a dark chapter in our country's history. Approximately 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, many of whom were US citizens, were taken from their homes and relocated into one of these camps, and solely on the basis of their ethnicity. This happened for the duration of the Second World War until about 1946, when the last camp was closed. But rather than speak out to protest this unjust racist treatment, many internees were silent. And this silence was criticized by younger generations of Japanese Americans. Sorry about that, don't know why that's doing it. The authors discuss this construct in their narratives, and I argue that this provides rich textual evidence for reconceptualizing silence as an appropriate versus inappropriate response to such adversity. Moreover, I've reconceptualized silence in my work in four key ways. Okay, first, as a valuable rhetorical tool that enabled this population to survive isolation, adversity, extreme humiliation, and profound personal and societal loss. Second, as a way of saving face, and also protecting one's self-identity as older generation ethnic Americans experiencing extreme instances of powerlessness. Third, as a way to reassert their unbroken loyalty to their adopted or birth country, the US, in a time of World War. And fourth, as a means of reharmonizing this ethnic population within larger American society, reharmonization referring to gaining stability. Okay, I actually think, is there a way I can show this a little better? Can you all see the screens?
Yes.
You can, okay. As their narratives unfold, the writers come to terms with how wordlessness in a time of powerlessness afforded strength and prevented greater loss of face for older generations of Japanese Americans during World War II, and show readers through their heartfelt narratives challenging their elders how the purpose of silence as a speech act does not need to symbolize weakness or surrender or complicity, if you will, as is often the case in individualistic societies. Rather, it can work as a powerful rhetorical device to enable both individuals and communities to survive years of hardship, racism, ethnic violence, forced segregation from larger society, imprisonment, isolation, and profound loss. So the theoretical basis for this paper is Irving Goffman's classic message framing theory, which posits that interpretation of a situation involves subjective meaning for both the message sender and the receiver. So while he makes a compelling case for using individual rather than social interpretations when applying this theory, it is nonetheless a communication strategy guided by how the experience is structured. And this can be extended beyond the individual into populations under duress. That's part of my argument. I am on my laptop, so I don't know if that's why I'm having problems today. Okay. So in the specific case or instance of internment, Goffman's work is used to scaffold the position that silence in times of adversity and powerlessness is in fact a powerful speech act, both directly and indirectly. Okay, and let me just explain that a little more. Directly, it serves as a pragmatic survival strategy, and indirectly, it serves the purpose of face saving, showing unbroken loyalty, and reharmonization of a particular community with certain values and traditions. Okay, in a beautiful foreword to this paper, psychologist Mark Palmer talks about these silent survivors of internment as really the heroes of the story. And I couldn't agree more. And he writes, at first, we may find it difficult to accept that silence can be a powerful tool of injustice. A popular view of the modern hero is a person who may be powerless, but she makes her voice heard in protest and in direct confrontation with adversity. We tend to envy those who find the courage to speak truth to power. Yet, can we also imagine the hero standing silent and even yielding to oppression? The authors frame their discussions on silence, on this construct, through a critical lens. And this includes both cultural and generational differences. And to be fair, they primarily address it as an inadequate response by their elders to being forcibly interned, trying to understand why didn't they speak out, right? In a way that not only, I argue, pressures previous generations to verbalize and revisit this past victimization, but also to be judged by it. And I wanted to share author Violet Harada's view. She notes that for decades, the Japanese American story of incarceration was largely hidden under a cloak of silence. This is also supported by King and Ono's cross-cultural research that suggests that the Japanese have a natural proclivity for silence in communication, and that traditionally within Japanese culture, a greater relative value has been placed on silence in comparison to talk. Okay, but at different points in these conversations, in these narratives, right, with the silent internment survivors, some kind of understanding develops between the authors and their family members. And I argue that these silent survivors really are the heroes of the internment story. Within the framework of silence can be found a powerful message of hope, strength, and resilience for those targeted individuals and their larger communities. And as a speech act, right? Speech acts that are not outright direct verbal responses to situations of injustice and discrimination, but instead allude to a larger meaning, such as saving face and reharmonization, can also carry meaning to help ensure a community's survival. And that's that direct pragmatic role. Despite great
Kelli,
odds.
you have
Yeah.
2 more minutes. You have 2 more minutes.
Okay, I'll hurry. Okay, which may be viewed by victims as more important than individual rights. And this can be seen in 2 of the authors' accounts. And I better hurry. Okay, and then we talk about the role of culture, right? And in Grant's book, she says her grandmother confided in her granddaughter that for many traditional Japanese, it was unthinkable to verbally protest. No matter the injustice, no matter the inequality and prejudice, you didn't resent the hurtful or negative things that happened to you. Right? You followed the rules. But saying verbal speech is the only form of purposeful communication in all outcomes and all contexts is short-sighted, since diverse cultures teach different oral and written communication rules and protocols. And the last thing I'll bring up is the use of silence as a speech construct employed in times of adversity does not imply that talk fails to matter. Okay, I'm not saying that. Instead, it suggests that nonverbal communications that do not rely solely on oral language for interpretation can encourage a larger meaning that creates impressions on message receivers. And here's my works cited, and I hope that you'll take time to read my conference paper, and I appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you.